Okay, this is topic 6, and we are looking at the police state control and opposition in this next section. We're in this third section here. So once Hitler has secured his place as dictator, we then look at what he does to control the people. Now you'll remember, at their most, the Nazis only had 38% of the vote. So Hitler knows that most people don't support him, so he's going to have to persuade and force his people to believe in his Nazi ideology. We start with the use of terror then, and this is under a police state. A police state is a country which is very closely controlled by its police or its army or its spies or other methods. So there are 4 that you need to know here. First, we have the SS Protection Squad, and remember they start as the elite bodyguard for the Nazis, hand selected by Hitler. And these are meant to be your best of your best, your purebred Aryan men who are meant to represent the racially pure German state. Their leader is Heinrich Himmler, and they are set aside from the SA because they have a black uniform. They control the police, they protect Nazi leaders, and they are completely loyal to Hitler. They are permitted also to be violent. The SS men are mainly looking at political and racial opponents, kind of acting like a superior police, and later on they will be running the camps. Next, we have the Gestapo, and these are a secret police force. They don't wear a uniform because you are not meant to know who they are. They've got permission to use torture to look for political enemies within the normal population here. So their job is to primarily spy on the public for any anti-Nazi feelings. They are tapping phones and listening to conversations. They are reading letters. But there are actually not that many of them. There is only 30,000 in a population of 80 million. So what this tells us is that the propaganda about Gestapo listening to everybody everywhere is really working on the people. They rely mainly on informants, that is Germans telling on Germans. And because there is this fear that they are being watched, people are encouraged to do so. Now, the myth that they are everywhere is shown here at the numbers of them in the towns like Hamburg, for example. Mainly the Gestapo officers there worked in offices and they were dealing with an influx of Nazi paperwork. They were not really out on the streets listening to people. However, the fear was real and people did really worry about stepping a foot wrong in case somebody told the Gestapo on them. In 1939, 160,000 people were arrested for political offences and sent to concentration camps. Some were permitted to return to normal life, and they would warn people of these concentration camps, and it furthered the fear of the Gestapo. Next, we have concentration camps. Now, please do not fall into the trap of describing death camps at this stage. It's not on our course and it's not something that we've taught you. At first, these types of camps are like prisons of such, and they are for political prisoners. So by 1939, there are 150,000 political prisoners under protective arrest, and this is basically anybody that Hitler doesn't like, including people like our communists or trade unionist leaders. They're locked up for opposing the Nazis. The first one is in Dachau, and there is a women's prison at Moringen as well. They're normally in isolated areas so people can easily see them and access them and know what's going on. Inmates here that you might find are prostitutes or homosexuals, minorities like Jews and Romani, and are political prisoners. Finally, we have the judges and the courts. Hitler sets up the Nationalist Socialist League for the Maintenance of the Law. This law was established to completely control the legal system in Germany. It required that all judges, lawyers, and civil servants pledge absolute loyalty to the Nazi regime. Judges would be denied membership if they upset the Nazis, and juries were abolished completely. So judges had to swear an oath to Hitler, just as the army did. Hitler also had his own People's Court, and this is where cases of treason would be heard against the state. So this would be your political enemies, for example. And more often than not, people were found guilty. It was a foregone conclusion if you got sent here. There is no right to appeal. You are not properly represented by anybody. And between 1934 and 39, 534 people were sentenced to death for political offences. Next, we have the Nazi use of propaganda and censorship. So, as a reminder, propaganda is this kind of political persuasion to persuade people to see something your way, and censorship is where you ban people from certain information so they are not properly informed. Joseph Goebbels is made the Minister of Propaganda, and this is part of a totalitarian state where the state controls everything, even the news that you receive. So, firstly, the Nazis control the press. All newspapers come under Nazi control, and journalists are told what they can and cannot print. This is censorship. By 1935, 1,600 newspapers are closed down and there is no free press. So there is no true journalism really happening. This makes it hard for Germans to receive balanced news stories. They are not receiving foreign information, such as from the BBC, so they have nothing to challenge what they're reading in these Nazi newspapers. Next, we have the radio, and this is a great, cheap, effective way to get messages to the people. In 1933, radio stations were censored, so only certain radio stations were allowed to be heard if the Nazis deemed them appropriate. There were frequent, repeated messages, and this is a way to get your message over and over again to the people. So this would be things like encouraging hatred of Jewish people, or reiterating racial superiority, or militarism as a way to run the country. It was also to create a sense of unity amongst the people and to mobilise the population behind Nazi goals. By 1939, 70% of German families owned radios. They're mass produced, they're cheap, and it's a really easy way to get messages to the people. They would set them up in cafes and schools and factories, and people would be marched down to surround the radio and listen to Hitler's speeches. Short-range radios were banned. This meant that people could not receive messages from foreign news outlets such as the BBC. Next, sport becomes Nazified. All teams are to salute and they are to display the swastika on flags. The 1936 Olympic Games was a great show of Nazi power, where the organisation and the efficiency of the running of the Games made Nazi Germany look like a strong Germany. Germany wins 33 medals and it is showing off German talent here. The press are censored as well during this, so nobody is allowed to criticise what is happening in Germany at this time. And during the Olympic Games, the Nazis tend to tone down the anti-Semitism a little bit because they're trying to show off to the rest of Europe. Next, we have rallies. So the Nazis would put on huge speeches to impress the people. This is a way to try and engage the community and bring unity to the German people. They want people to be behind their strong messages. Thousands of swastikas and banners and shining searchlights and an eagle with a 100-foot wingspan would impress crowds at these speeches. And the wall of light, the use of light technology, would light up the speeches and further impress the people. Next then we have propaganda and censorship in the arts. So you will remember under the Kaiser things were quite traditional, and then under a Weimar government we had liberal ideas where people were painting realism and futurism. So we have a big change when we get to the Nazis, and this begins with the 1933 Reich Chamber of Culture, and this looks at over all of your art and your film and your architecture. So all things connected to the Reich Chamber of Culture had to represent Gleichschaltung. Now, Gleichschaltung is this idea that all cultural activities should be consistent with Nazi ideas of tradition and strong families and loyalty and struggle and discipline. This idea of unity, bringing everybody together. Now, in terms of art, they created a Reich Chamber of Visual Arts. 42,000 people were accepted into the membership, but others were forbidden if they were found to be producing artwork that didn't follow this idea of Gleichschaltung. In 1936, 12,000 paintings and sculptures were removed from art galleries, including that of Van Gogh and Picasso. Gestapo would burst into workshops, and your membership would be revoked if you were not producing art that fell in line with Gleichschaltung. The Nazis promoted these new ideas about art with the Great German Art Exhibition to try and promote work that they truly wanted to be displayed. In terms of film, this was an excellent way to get your propaganda messages out. There were ticket sales of 250 million in 1933, meaning lots of Germans liked to go to the cinema. This, therefore, is an excellent way to get your message across. Plotlines for films had to be sent to Goebbels, and he might make changes to them if he wanted Nazi ideology to be promoted in some way. The Nazi Party made 1,300 films across their reign, and they would be stories with moral messages that all come back to Nazism. Also, at the start of films, they would quite often show newsreels of all the achievements of the Nazis in order to get people to support them. So this is more propaganda. Next, Nazis also attack literature. So any new books had to have permission from the Reich Chamber of Culture, and they ban certain writers or they censor their books. So 2,500 authors, including F. Scott Fitzgerald, writer of The Great Gatsby, were banned. Anything that was seen as pro-Jewish or too American or non-traditional was banned. In 1933, university students get involved with a book burning of all these books, and 20,000 are piled up onto a giant bonfire. Overall, millions of books are burned, and certainly many are banned. Next, we have architecture. The Nazis did not like the previous Bauhaus movement with the futuristic buildings, and they much preferred Greek and Roman designs. Albert Speer is hired as a Nazi architect to make some of these Nazi buildings appear like Greek and Roman. This is with columns, for example, and there is a link there between these ancient empires and the Nazi buildings. They wanted something that represented power and strength. Next, we have music. Jazz music was banned as it was considered too black and too American, and Mendelssohn is banned as he is Jewish, so they also ban Jewish music. They're controlling what people listen to. Beethoven and Bach are considered to be okay, and one of Hitler's favourites was German folklore music, or folk music, sorry, so that one was considered to be okay. So they are controlling aspects of all areas of culture, and looking at what people watch and what they listen to and what they read. It truly is a totalitarian state. Every aspect is controlled. Next, we are going to look at opposition or conformity from various groups, and we're going to start with the youth in Germany at this time. By 1936, boys had to be in the Hitler Youth. It was mandatory. And this caused upset amongst many teenagers who simply did not like the activities of the Hitler Youth or the message of the Nazis. So there are two major youth groups at this time that teenagers might choose to join. The first are the Edelweiss Pirates, and they are your working class teens from your bigger German cities. Boys would wear their hair long, they'd copy American clothing, and this was all a sign of resistance to the Nazi regime. They would go hiking and sing parody songs and would tell anti-Nazi jokes. They would wear the Edelweiss flower as a sign that they were a part of the Edelweiss pirates, and it was also a message that they were against Nazism. The Gestapo found it quite hard to keep an eye on them because it was hard to distinguish them from other teenagers at the time. How far does their opposition go? Well, it's fairly limited as they are mainly against the cultural aspects of Nazism. So they don't like the Hitler Youth uniform, for example, and it's not really a political attack here. The acts of resistance are small scale, they're not really causing the Nazis to be too worried, it's graffiti and it's clothing, so it's not really threatening the Nazi regime. Further, if we look at membership, there are 2,000 Edelweiss pirates compared to 8 million in the Hitler Youth. Now we know there are 8 million in the Hitler Youth because they are mandatory, so it isn't really a fair reflection there, but they are not the typical German youth. Next, we have the swing youth, and these are normally wealthy middle class teenagers from cities like Berlin and Hamburg. Again, they like the American culture and they really like the music from America too. So you will find them playing illegal records, and you might refer to them as the jazz youth. They organise illegal dances, and sometimes these dances could have up to 6,000 attendees. They would smoke, they would drink, not really traditional activities. The result again here is it's limited opposition because it's mostly cultural and it's not really an attack politically on the Nazis. We are now going to look at church opposition, and to understand this you need to understand your difference between the Catholic and Protestant churches. There were many Catholics in Germany at this time. They make up about 1/3 of all the Christians in Germany. Now remember, Catholics are going to cause a problem in terms of authority because their allegiance is with the Pope, who is a foreign power. He does not live in Germany, and Hitler does not want this. Hitler wants a totalitarian state where he has ultimate control of everything. If a certain subsection of people are loyal to the Pope, who is a foreign power, this is going to be a challenge to Hitler's totalitarian state. So there is some friction at the start, and it leads to the Pope and Hitler agreeing the Concordat. The Concordat is an agreement that the Nazis will not get themselves involved with Catholic church services, and in return, the Catholics will not preach against the Nazi state. Hitler does not keep to his word, and Catholic priests find themselves followed and harassed, and their phones are tapped. Because the Concordat is broken, this incites the Pope to write a letter called With Burning Anxiety, and this is a huge public criticism of the Nazis. The result of this is that Hitler bans this letter being read out in Catholic churches. Some people still smuggle it in though. The Gestapo burst into the churches and they search for it. Catholic bishops are forced to swear an oath to the Nazi regime, and if they don't, they are rounded up and put in Dachau prison. On the other side, we have the Protestants in Germany at this time, which form about 2/3 of the rest of the Christians in the country. Now, at first, the Protestants are in favour of the Nazi regime because the alternative is being ruled by the anti-Christian communists, and the communists don't tend to like any sort of religion at all. In 1936, many of the Protestants actively work with the Nazis by forming the Reich Church. The Reich Church is headed, of course, by Hitler and the Nazis. Many of them agreed with some of these policies within the Reich Church, including that Nazis were forbidden from being baptised and that the Old Testament should be banned as it's linked to the Hebrew Bible, and many Protestants quite liked these anti-Jewish ideas. Churches became more Nazified, and in some you would find swastikas and banners and maybe even a portrait of Hitler. This reduces the power of the church, and it falls in line with Hitler's idea of a totalitarian state, him controlling every aspect of people's lives. There was some Protestant opposition here, and we can find this with Pastor Niemöller and his opposition of the Nazis. He forms something called the Pastors' Emergency League with some other Protestants, and they are actively speaking out against the Nazi meddling of the Protestant church service. He also sets up the Confessing Church. This is a Protestant church that does not agree with every aspect of the Nazi regime. 6,000 Protestant pastors join Pastor Niemöller in the Confessing Church. 2,000 remain with the Reich Church, which shows that this is a form of opposition. Pastor Niemöller is himself spied on, and eventually he is sent to a concentration camp, and the Pastors' Emergency League is banned. So him speaking out was quite dangerous, as he knew that he could be sent to a concentration camp, and he was. The result of this was then that 800 pastors who speak out are sent to concentration camps, and we also have big attendances at church services, and this is a way of the people showing a form of resistance or opposition without leading to them being arrested and sent to a concentration camp. It could be argued, however, that when you look at opposition here from the church, just like with the youth, it is quite limited. Really what they are speaking out against is the Nazi control of their church services. They are not speaking out against the Nazi regime itself. They just don't want to be controlled by the Nazis. Next, we have opposition from the trade unions. Now, as you know, Hitler has banned all forms of opposition, however, they do still exist underground. The Communist Party encouraged workers to go on strike and to not work as hard as they could. They might call in sick or work deliberately slow or damage machinery, and this was a way to show a little form of resistance here. However, this type of resistance really is limited. Because the party is banned, it's hard for them to spread their message and engage all workers. It doesn't show any real political threat. Next, we have opposition from the army. So some army officers opposed the Nazis, and General Ludwig Beck was the chief of staff for the German army. He tried to get other officers to join him in arresting Hitler, and he even sent a message to the British army saying that they would not resist should the army try and oust the Nazis. He leads a failed bomb plot against Hitler on more than one occasion in 1943 and 1944. This shows that there is some serious opposition from within the army, but it is not very widespread because the punishment if you are caught is so severe. So this was quite limited opposition too. Next, we have opposition from political parties. Once again, political parties are banned at this time, but the Social Democrats are working underground, publishing a newspaper called the Red Shock Troop. 3,000 copies are circulated. Organisers, if they are found, are sent to concentration camps. The SPD then set themselves up abroad where it was safer, but it is harder to communicate with the German people from abroad. Again, opposition is limited as they are simply banned and it's very dangerous to be active.